officially. Hey, welcome to the San Francisco MySQL meetup. We usually start with our sponsors, and God, tonight we have a lot. So as usual, we have Percona, and as most of you are aware, April is Percona Live, and they have again given us some passes. So we'll be raffling those off, and that's why this is the best month to come to our meetup. Craigslist dropped by with some swag. They have some really cool, those flash drives and bottle openers. Got some of those. We got some t-shirts. GitHub sent me some stickers. Their stickers are totally cool. Of course, I already have one on my computer, but we'll probably make those for anybody. And I have one woman's t-shirt from GitHub that we'll raffle off after the Percona passes. So it's a pretty good night for swag. So besides Percona, that means we also have our usual sponsors of O'Reilly, Lithium, it does the space, Vendini is me, and so GitHub and Craigslist. So I think that's it. Does anybody here have any announcements they would like to make? We usually let you all make an announcement as long as it's under a minute. Okay, good. I don't know if you guys maybe don't know this, but I've been trying to get a security person who could come and talk to us and still meet our requirement of technical and open source. And it seemed open source was the hard part. And Jeremy, I always hang out with a little bit at the Percona Live conference because he doesn't live in San Francisco. And he was at the last meetup or the meetup before?
Both, yeah.
So I guess it was the meetup before, and he said he had a security talk that was open source. So, of course, I snagged him for this month because it's really great. And it's always nice to have somebody who comes to the meetups come and talk. So I'm going to hand it off to Jeremy and let him get started. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jeremy Glick. I'm a MySQL DBA. I'm actually based out of the Chicago area. I've been in Sacramento since October, working a contract there. That's ending. Not sure where I'm going from there, but luckily I was able to get into the San Francisco meetup before I left. This is something I've always wanted to do. I worked as a DBA, I said about 6 years, and my first DBA job was at a company called Peapod. It's an online grocery business based in the Chicago area. I worked at a couple places after that, including a company called iCrossing, which is a digital marketing agency. And during some of that time, I had to set up audit logging. The reason for this was for regulatory compliance. And that gave me the idea of creating a presentation, which last year for Percona Live, I submitted a paper for that. It turned out that another person submitted a paper just like mine. His name's Andy Moore, and they paired us up together, and he's helped me a lot with these slides that I'm doing today, so I wanted to give him credit. We're also doing a presentation similar to this at Percona Live in a few weeks. Here's an overview of what I'll go over today. We'll talk about why you might want to log, methods of logging other than audit plugins. I'll talk about audit plugins. I'm going to talk about the three open source, or the three most popular open source plugins. And then I'll talk about Elasticsearch ELK and follow up with a couple demos. Before I get started, I'll just define what a log is. A log generally consists of a timestamp and some useful data. What data that is varies from app to app. The format also varies depending on the application. It may be single line or multi-line. With audit logs, those are generally created for an audit trail so that you can basically see who did what, when, and where. There are several reasons why you might want to log. The first thing people probably think about is security. But regarding security, you need to remember that logging by itself does not prevent something from happening. It's just going to tell you what happened after the fact. If users know you have logging in place, it may deter them from doing things. but it's not going to prevent it. Could give you a quicker response time if you have alerting integrated with your logging. It could also help with investigations or even prosecutions. But you should still use your best security practices. You want to restrict user access, secure your operating system using firewalls, use things like SE Linux, etc. Compliance, that's a big reason why to log. My 2 experiences have been precisely because of this. An auditor has come to us with a list of items that need to be done, and we simply just need to check off that item on the list, showing that we were logging at whatever level they required. Debugging is another reason to log. When I have set up logging, it hasn't been for this reason, but it turned out being very helpful. A lot of times developers come to DBAs or DBAs come to the developers because of issues with database, and either the developer doesn't know exactly what's being sent to the database, or there's a disagreement on that, and it's easy to look things up when you have the logging in place. It's especially helpful with ORMs and things where it's not so obvious what queries are being generated. This is titled How Not to Log. These are methods of logging before that people used a lot before the audit plugins came out. The general log, as all of you know, is very verbose. If you have that enabled, it's going to grow very busy machine. It's also going to be hard to find the information that you need in this log because it's so big. The slow log might not log all the queries you need depending on the long query threshold. It's also, it captures things like times, so it's going to be a little more intrusive on your system. The binary log is another method of logging that people have used in the past. The issue with the binary log is it's only going to log your updates. You're not going to see your reads in there. It's also not human readable unless you run it through MySQL binlog. And even then, it can be a hassle to look things up. I've been through that where maybe somebody accidentally truncated a table, and I had to look through the logs to find where it happened. And it takes a little more time than other methods might take. Sniffing the network, you can use tools like TCP dump, and you can sniff the network, but that's only going to capture your network activity. It won't show you what's connecting locally through the socket. Or if you have more than one network interface, it's possible you could miss some of the events that are coming through. In schema updates, that's another one that it's just not a very robust solution. You can update timestamps when records are updated. You can use triggers and stored procedures. And then finally, I have init connect. Before the plugins came out, I've used init connect to log connections to the server. Init connect would go in your MySQL configuration file, and you can specify what to run when somebody connects. For instance, you could run a stored procedure, or you could run something that records the user's name and a timestamp to a table. The issue with that, it only runs when somebody connects, and it also does not run for super users. As of MySQL 5.5.3, MySQL's pluggable audit interface became available, and this opened up the door for several new. You can create your own custom plugin if you want. There's some good books out there on writing plugins, and there's even some books that cover some auditing. There's also some open source plugins to use. I've listed what are considered the 3 most popular open source audit plugins. It's McAfee, Percona's plugin, and MariaDB. I'll talk a little bit more about these in a little bit. When you've decided what plugin you want, there's a couple different methods of installing. You can use the install plugin command from the command prompt, or you can use the plugin load option in your configuration, or you can pass it as a parameter to MySQLD, which is essentially the same as putting it in your configuration. There's also an option where you can force that the plugin runs. This is an option for any plugin, but it's especially useful for an audit plugin where you want to make sure that auditing is taking place. where that the logging is taking place. You can pass a few different options to it, but popular would be you can pass force, which will prevent MySQL from starting up unless the plugin is enabled, and force plus permanent, which it forces it to be enabled, plus it prevents users from disabling it during runtime. The configuration options for plugins vary from plugin to plugin. There's some filtering, there's sync and performance options, and then there's some output options. I'll go over these with the plugins when I. The first one I'll talk about is McAfee. I think this one's been around the longest, and it's actually been available since MySQL 5.1. And you might be wondering, how was this available before the pluggable audit interface came about? It's because they're using something called binary hooking. So they bypass the API to get to the events that they want to log. They have great community support. If you go to their website, they have their project hosted on GitHub. They have good documentation. Their support is good. If you file a bug, you'll respond quickly. Their lead developer's name is Guy Litt, and I've talked to him a couple times. He's a very helpful person. They also have the most filtering options out of all the plugins. This is probably because of the binary hooking. It allows them to do a lot more than they could do through the API. They have JSON output, which is nice. That's my preferred one. It's a single line. It's easy to read. It's easy to parse with tools like grep and awk. And for output, you can output to a file or to a socket. And the socket, I believe the socket might be there to use with their proprietary, but you can also use it with syslog-ng. So that might be a con if you're running syslog and you don't want to switch to, if you don't want to install syslog-ng, then that might be a reason you don't want to use it. But I've used syslog-ng and it's worked for me. The one issue with McAfee is it requires something called offsets. This has to do with the binary hooking. So the offsets allow McAfee to access internal data structures that are not available through the API. So a lot of these offsets are hard-coded into the plugin, but if you have a distribution or a version of MySQL that's not, then you'll have to create these offsets yourself. There's a tool here. It's called offset extract. It's provided by McAfee, and you pass the path to MySQL-D. And in some instances, if you have a version that doesn't include the debugging symbols, you also have to install a debugging package. For example, with Percona server, you have to do this. So if you want to generate the offsets for Percona server, this is how you do it right here. Filtering options with McAfee, like I said, they have the most options out of all the three plugins we'll talk about. You can filter on the commands, so you can specify you want to just record updates and deletes. You can put a comma-separated list there. You can filter on objects, and the objects you can use wildcards with. So if you want to log just a single database, put database name .star. You can whitelist users. So if you have let's say you have a read-only monitoring user, it connects every 5 seconds and makes sure the server's up. You might not want all that activity in your log, so you could whitelist that user. And you can also whitelist commands. It's kind of the opposite of the record commands. This is a sample of the output from McAfee Audit plugin. You can see it's JSON. I've formatted this for readability. Normally that would all be one line. You'll see it shows the user that's connecting here. It shows the command type. And it shows objects, which is a nice feature. And at the bottom, you'll see the query that was run. It's select star from people. This is another one. This is a select from a view. Now, this is important because through the API, it doesn't get you the table level information. So if you do this query through the MySQL's audit API, you wouldn't be able to see the object. So you would see the select from people _VW, the view, but you wouldn't see what table it's actually touching. here you can see the two objects. You can see the view, and you can see the table here. It's called people. Percona's audit plugin is the next one I'll talk about. Percona audit plugin ships with Percona, but you don't need to download it separately. You don't have to generate any checksums like you have to with McAfee. It's considered to be a drop-in replacement for Oracle's audit plugin, which they've added a few features, but overall is still a drop-in replacement. And they have limited filtering. You can filter on connections or queries or both. So it doesn't have the same level of filtering. They do have multiple output formats, which is nice. You can pick JSON, XML, or CVS to go to your log files. So one of their configuration options is audit log strategy. This is kind of a performance setting, but there's 4 different settings for that. Asynchronous, that tells you you can log using memory buffer. Do not drop messages if the buffer's full. Performance, similar, but it will drop messages if the buffer's full. So it will log using memory buffer, drop messages if the buffer is full. Semi-synchronous, log directly to file. Do not flush and sync every event. And finally, synchronous, log directly to file, flush and sync every event. So performance-wise, synchronous will probably hurt you the most. The more you sync, the more that's going to affect your performance. You're going to get less queries per second that way. Percona supports output to file or to syslog. I mentioned that McAfee supports syslog ng, Percona syslog. Here's some sample output. For this, I've selected XML for the output type. That's actually what Oracle's MySQL audit plugin defaults to is XML. But you'll see here, it's got some of the same information. It's got a timestamp. It has your select query. I'm doing the same query, select from people. But on this next one, it's to select from the view. This is what I was talking about. It only shows you the select from it only shows you the view name. You can't see what table that's being touched underneath. So it's just something that the API is lacking right now. MariaDB audit plugin is the next one I'll talk about, and this is the final one. They've actually expanded the API, and they have access to that table level object information. So it's kind of neat. They also are included with the MariaDB download, so there's no need to download it separately or do the offsets. As I mentioned, they have access to table level events. Their output format is CSV. They support syslog. And in the previous presentations I've done, we've always mentioned that they log text, or they log passwords as plain text. But that's been fixed in the most recent version. So there's a little note on here, plain text passwords before version 5.5.42. Or that's the plugin version right there. So if you're running something older than this, you might want to upgrade. They have a little more filtering options in Percona. You can specify your server audit events. That can be query, which will log all queries. Table, if you put table as one of the values, that'll get that object information I told you about, like the view where we saw the people table being selected. You can specify query DDL and query DML. That'll let you select what types of queries you want to see. And they have an exclude and include users setting. Here's some sample output. CSV format, it's the same query. Timestamp, it's got the query here. It shows what user is being used. And here's the select from the view. So you'll see that they actually show you, so there's 2 entries in here. One is showing the table object. So it shows test database, people table, and then right below that it shows your select from the people view. Some notes on replication. McAfee audit plugin does log events that are played by the SQL thread. There's a workaround for that. They have the whitelist user setting. You can specify a user as just these curly braces, and then it will not log what the SQL thread runs. It sees the SQL thread as a blank user. The workaround. Percona and MariaDB do not log replicated events. Here's a few best practices. You just need to remember that you're logging just activity on the database, so you need to make sure that your OS is secure. If somebody gets access to your physical data files, it's not going to be in your logs. It's not going to be in your MySQL audit logs. Also, you might want to utilize some log rotation because depending on how much logging you do, it could grow very fast. Sequential logging lives away from random access. You may want to write your logs to a different device. You might want to use a file system with journaling so you can be crash safe. And synchronizing to disk hurts a lot. I'll give a little demonstration showing the sync levels can decrease your performance. Here's a few ideas how you might want to store your logs. You should remember that your logs, so you should treat them as such. Want to keep them on secure storage. You might want to encrypt them. You could assign your logs to ensure that they haven't been altered at all. Set your permissions appropriately. You can store your logs off-site. And you could also store on read-only media. Log aggregation. So there's a few proprietary solutions. These are just 3 of them that we've put up here for working with your log files. A lot of times if people aren't using these, their logs are just sitting there and they eventually are deleted. And you usually don't get much use out of them. Andy and I talked about this, and he actually came up with the idea of trying Elasticsearch ELK to work with your log files. And it ended up being a pretty good idea. Elasticsearch ELK is comprised of 3 main components, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Elasticsearch is a full-text and analytics engine. It's based on Apache Lucene. It's a distributed search server. It features a RESTful web interface and schema-free JSON documents. Comparing the terminology to a relational database, you might consider an Elasticsearch index to be like a table and a document to be like a row. Logstash is for collection and centralization of your logs. It supports several different input types, both TCP and UDP, files, syslog, Windows event logs, standard in, and much more. It has filtering, so you can modify, manipulate, and transform your events. You can use these grok filters, which basically you would use a form of regular expressions with those, and you can actually modify your data. And they support several different methods of output, so that's nice. There's some plugins available. You can actually output to Nagios and create alerts. You could send chat messages. You can send text messages. This is a little sample of the Logstash configuration file. It has an input section, a filter section, and an output section. You can see here for the input, it's a file, and this is the log file. And you give it a type. For this, we just gave it MySQL audit. But for instance, if you had a MySQL slow log in here, you could call it MySQL-slow. You could give each log. It doesn't have to be MySQL logs. It could be all your logs. And by giving a type, then it allows you to sort by those. Then the filtering, that's where you can actually manipulate your data. And then output, here we have it going to Elasticsearch. Kibana, this is the K of the ELK stack. It's a really nice browser-based dashboards. It's for analytics of Elasticsearch documents. The three tools really work nicely together. So I think that's why a lot of people use it. For my testing, this is how I set it up. Each box here represents a different virtual server that I'm running. So this one on the left here, I'm running MySQL. This is actually, I'm running Percona server here, and that writes out to the audit log. And then Logstash takes that as input. I think on one of my instances, I'm also logging the slow log. Logstash takes that one in, and I'm actually doing some grok filtering because the slow log is multi-line events. So I'm grabbing those fields and separating. And then I pass that over to Redis, which would be considered a broker. It's a key value memory store, and that really provides a caching layer to Logstash. Logstash takes the Redis as the input, and then it outputs to Elasticsearch, and then you can use Kibana to search your Elasticsearch. Okay, I'm going to give a couple quick demonstrations. One, I'll show some performance with McAfee audit plugin, and then I'll give a little demo of using Elasticsearch ELK to look at your log files. Yeah.
Have you benchmarked to see performance of each of these three types, doing similar, McAfee, Percona, Maria?
No, we've done some benchmarking with different sync levels, which I'll show you with McAfee. We've done that on them, but we haven't done a comparison between the three of them. I wasn't sure it would be fair to do that because they each have different features. But yeah, I haven't done that. But might be something to do in the future. At least, compare logging just connections or something like that. Any other questions right now? Okay, I'll open up for questions after my demo. I just said, okay, nice. Okay, so here I'm running, on the left screen here, I'll just log into MySQL here. And you can see this is Percona server that I'm running here. And on the right side, this is just a tail of the audit log. If I do show variables like audit, that'll show us our options from McAfee audit plugin. These are all, they used to display nicely, and then because they at one time were logging passwords as they created this nice little regular expression here to try to mask those passwords, so now it's all over the place. You can see the offsets are specified here. I did generate those. And then it specifies the file that we're logging to. Let's see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the sync level to different things, and then I'll just run MySQL slap, and we'll see how fast it runs. So let's see. So I'm going to start out with, actually I'll start out with 0. So this will let it use the buffering, and it won't force it to sync to disk. So it tells us our current value is 0. I'll run MySQL slap. This takes, it takes a few seconds to run. So this is not syncing every event. It's just it's syncing when it wants to. And then at the end here, we'll get some averages. And then I'm going to set the sync to sync every single event. Then we'll compare the two. Okay, so we have an average here of 0.9 seconds. So now I'm going to set to log every event, or sync every event, I should say. Run MySQL slap again. And of course, your hardware is going to be different than what I'm running here. This is an old laptop, but just to give you an idea that performance can vary with your syncing level. Seems like it's taking longer. I can't tell. Okay, so did it take less? Oh, that's nice. All right, let me set the sync level to 10. So it'll sync after every 10 events. Okay, I'm going to try this one more. Oops. That run query. Is it up? Yeah. Yeah, it crashed. So that must be why it went quicker that second time. Okay, because I was going to say it's never gone quicker when I did that. Okay, so it crashed. I'm not going to spend too much time debugging that, but the more you sync, the longer it will take. Or it may get so bad it crashes your server. So, right here on this server, I'm also running a Logstash agent. I'll just show you that configuration real quick. So we're taking the input. Can you guys see this? Is this okay? Taking the audit log files input, and then we're outputting here. This actually, it's Redis. It's going to the server. It's just running Redis. And then that goes through that whole process that I showed you on that one slide. And I have Kibana running. I'm just going to show you the default dashboard that you get when you install it without customizations. You can do a lot of neat customizations. But when you install it, you get that page there, and you can just open it up, and it'll give you a bunch of information. Let's see, I'm going to change my time span to 30 days. Okay, so this is what I just ran now in that benchmark. So you can actually just zoom in on that. Zoom in a little more. And you can do searching up here. If we want to see selects, and I'll add another one for insert. Okay, so now we see selects and inserts marked different colors. And if you go down here, you can see the actual events that were logged. So the message here is actually the contents of the log. You see that's the JSON format. And I want to show you slow log also, if I can. So you remember in the Logstash is a type. Right here, these are the different types. So I'm going to look at just at the slow log. And you can see I use the grok filtering. This right here is the contents of the slow log, but I use the filtering to divide it up into these individual fields down here. So that's all I really had for the Elasticsearch ELK demo. Me and Andy will have some more at Percona Live that we're still working on. But I'm open for questions if anyone has any. Yeah, sure. Okay. I'm sorry? How do logins and logouts get logged? If you want them to be logged, all three of the plugins have the ability to log connections. So with McAfee, it's going to log all your connections. Let's see. I can show you what it looks like with McAfee, because it's right here at the bottom of this file. It just says quit. So with McAfee, that's what the logout looks like. But it does log your connections and your quits.
Does it also log failed password attempts?
Sorry?
Does it log failed password attempts?
Oh, failed password attempts. The question is, does it log failed password attempts? I'm actually not 100%, but I will give it a try real quick and see what happens. Okay, yep, so it shows failed login. Any others? Yeah? The question is how much of a performance hit versus not having the plugin running at all. In the test I've done, the times for not having a plugin were comparable with having the plugin and using buffering. So there wasn't really much of a hit at all. Compared to having the sync level high, or a sync after every event, then there's a pretty big hit. But if you're using the buffering, I didn't find much of a performance hit at all. I do not believe so. It may be with some of the plugins. I've primarily used McAfee. I don't recall it being configurable there, but I'll have to check into that. Other questions? Yeah, you can. Search for whatever you want. You can limit it by time span. Then you can search for different users in there, because the users their names are in there, their logs. So it is pretty easy to do that. And something else I didn't really I talked about that they have output to Nagios alerts and things. You could actually set up filtering, like say you want to know every time a failed login attempt, you could have it send a text message or something with each failed login attempt. So it's pretty powerful what you can do. All right, well, thank you. Oh, wait, one more question.
Can I fit out slow query?
You can, yeah. You
use tools like PT Query Digest?
Yeah, well, the question is, can you feed in this slow query log into it? You can put the slow query log through Logstash into Elasticsearch. You can do it with really almost any log. And even if you have your own in-house application with a unique log format, you can use these grok filters, even do those. But if you want to take it into say Elasticsearch and then run it through PT Query Digest, I don't know if that would work because it's modifying certain things. So you'd have to try that, but you may find that it doesn't work. You just need to use the raw file for that. Okay, well, thanks everybody.
So I actually have to have my iPad to figure out what we're raffling off. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thanks.
I'm sure I'll be following up, and you'll be giving me your slides that will be under 10 megabytes.
Yep.
Turns out that's why I don't have the last user slides up there, 20 megabytes zipped. So Ike is got to get back to me with those. So who has the raffle tickets? Because Jeremy, you're going to have to pull them. You get to pull. Mike, is Mike here? So what they've offered us is 1 full pass to the Percona Live and 1 full pass to OpenStack and 5 MySQL 101, which is good for developers and sysadmins and those DBAs that are starting out. But now we have to have the raffle, the tickets, so I can have Jeremy pull them out. And I'll also get the 1 T-shirt from GitHub and T-shirts from Craigslist. I think that's the downside of doing a meetup at where you work. That work can call you in. I don't know how many people here know how crazy I am about the Craigslist thing. Know that Jeremy brought some. I don't even drink beer or soda, but I just think these are the coolest things. So I've got some of these flash drives to raffle off. I don't know how many of you have to do SneakerNet at work, and you don't have a freaking flash drive, and it's also kind of cool at the party afterwards, or if you guys are all having casual Friday and you pop open some beers, you can always pop open your own with your flash drive. I know, I'm sorry you guys were waiting for Mike.
Sure.
And I do have one woman's Who asked a question here tonight? Didn't somebody over here ask a question?
Yeah.